Hi, this is Kelly. You're listening to the 12th episode of the Vote Her In series, a collaboration between Two Broads Talking Politics and author Rebecca Sive, where we cover the movement to elect our first woman president. You can find this series at twobroadstalkingpolitics.com/voteherin or in our regular feed anywhere podcasts are found. Hey everyone, this is Kelly with Two Broads Talking Politics. We are on episode number 12 of the Vote Her In series, which is a partnership with author Rebecca Sive. So I am here with my co-host Sophy. Hey Sophy.
Hey Kelly.
And we are, of course, joined as well by Rebecca. Hi Rebecca.
Hi there.
And so this episode, instead of interviewing someone, we're going to take a step back for a moment, sort of think about where we are, what we've learned, what's going on in the presidential election, and then we'll get back to some fascinating conversations next time around in 2 weeks. So we thought about sort of regrouping and talking about things we've learned. Maybe we could start by talking about what we've learned about the women who are running for president, and more broadly, maybe women running for office, things that we might not have been thinking about before we started these conversations.
So, yeah, I hope that we three are fascinating too, by the way.
Yes, of course.
But, it's great. I think it's a perfect time for us to sort of, think about what we've learned, what the listeners have learned perhaps and are thinking about, because we've just had a run of some great interviews with amazing people, as everyone knows. When I was thinking about it, of course, was focused on the presidency, although I think the lessons, that I've drawn from those interviews and watching what's been happening probably are applicable to women running for other office too. And there were, I guess, sort of three highlights of that learning for me, and they're based around watching the presidential candidates both on the trail and in the debates and in speeches and video. And I have to say the first thing for me, and I think that they've all demonstrated this, although perhaps Warren and Harris most forcefully, is they will be assertive and go toe-to-toe, no holds barred, right? Mm-hmm. It's been an incredible thing to watch them, particularly in the debates, but also to stare right into the camera, whether it's about immigrant rights, voting rights, or anything else, and not to sense as a listener or as a viewer any kind of softening around the edges. And I think in that vein, watching Amy Klobuchar and listening to her when we interviewed her, I was also struck by the fact, Amy's a very plain-spoken, direct person. She would say, that's my Minnesota nice, but, she doesn't, there's no weaving around. And I think that directness, that looking someone in the face, that looking right at Joe Biden or whoever it is been noteworthy and important for us to think about as the women go ahead, because it's only going to get tougher as the race narrows and there are fewer, candidates to sort of disperse the interest. I think the other thing is this, I guess I would call it full-throated discussion and advocacy of women's rights. And part of it is the push of the times, what's happening on the issue of reproductive rights and in particular. But, while Hillary Clinton was clearly forceful on these issues too, perhaps because she was the only woman, it felt or seemed different. But the defense of those issues, the weaving them into the broader issues of structural inequality and rights that they've all done is just, I don't think something we've seen that way before. And I kind of was remembering back to, the first year of the woman when Patty Murray talked about, a mom in tennis shoes. And that's how she framed, her discussion of, so to speak, women's rights. I care because I'm a mom in tennis shoes. And there was nothing the matter with that. But I can't begin to imagine Gillibrand or Klobuchar or Harris or Warren doing that. I think the times have changed and for the better. And related to that is sort of the last big thing for me on this front, which is there's no way of getting away from the fact, not that any of us would, that these women are all feminists with a capital F, so to speak, right? There's no other way to look at how they're presenting themselves. And I think that's noteworthy, perhaps even remarkable, certainly given the last few days and the hatred that's been spewed at other women officials. So that's kind of, I've been holding on to those things because, for one thing, they've been making me feel better in the face of what's going on.
Yes. You know, one of the things that I think, I don't want to say it's surprising exactly, but isn't a thing that you necessarily think of about candidates is how warm and nice all of these women are too. And, you know, so I think that there's this axis, right, of like a candidate needs to be both strong but also warm, and the thought is that it's harder for women candidates to show themselves as strong. But I think because of that, they tend to shy away from showing themselves as warm and compassionate, you know, because they don't want to seem weak. You know, I think that's a criticism that people saw of Hillary Clinton. But these women who are running are so warm. I mean, there's a video that's been the Warren campaign has been putting around about when she went down to the detention center in Florida. You know, and it shows her just hugging people and just sort of exuding warmth. And that's her whole, like, these selfie lines too. I mean, that's the side of Warren that you see that, you know, if you're looking at people on paper, you might not see that, but that women candidates now feel like they can show that side of themselves is wonderful and refreshing.
I just was going to second what Kelly said and to say that I've had the chance, because we've done these interviews and seen these women, to remark on that, and in particular with Elizabeth Warren, who people were saying to me, well, she's shrill. And I said, you should have heard her at Operation Push. You know, I mean, it was just incredible. And I think that goes for the others too. So yes, I think it makes them all the more remarkable.
And if you think about it, it's also potentially politically clever. In the era in which we're living, there's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of chaos, there's a lot of people scared, there's a lot of people looking for reassurance. And if you can be the candidate who comes across as warm and caring and protective, I think that's really appealing to a lot of people, particularly in the Democratic Party, but I think writ large in the United States too. So it could also just be very politically clever on top of being authentic.
Well, and there's no doubt that we want both, right? We want to feel like we're going to be taken care of, and we want to feel that people who are politically clever and care have an opportunity to win, right? Related to this, although it's perhaps the other side of the coin, is that there might be some differences in the way the men and the women campaign. I will confess I don't follow the male candidates the way I follow the women, but, you know, as we've discussed, I've been struck by their warmth. But I think the other thing is, and this is, I think, important for every woman who thinks about running for office or seeking office in an appointed fashion, is, you know, they understand that, you know, just like there's only one way to win a baseball game or a swimming meet or whatever it is, you know, you got to hit more, you know, balls than the other team does. They have to campaign in the same way that the men do. And they're showing that they can, you know, go toe to toe in the sort of traditional sense. And Sophie, you're pointing to that. They're being clever and smart and politically wise, and, you know, not thinking that, well, just because I'm a woman, it doesn't mean I have to do such and such. No, it does mean you have to hit the ball every time you get up to the plate. So I kind of think that some people who might still think, you know, a woman's candidacy is sufficiently different that some of those strategies and tactics aren't required, will see, no, you have to do that stuff, and you might not like it, but you're going to have to stomach it, you know, including being somewhat critical of your colleagues if that's what you feel you need to do.
Yeah, and so one of the questions that you had on our list of things to think about was whether women pay a price for being confrontive. And I think we've seen a few different answers to that. So Kamala Harris obviously seems to have gotten a huge bump from directly, combating Joe Biden in the debate. Like that confrontation seems to have paid off dividends. Whether we're seeing that as much with the other candidates, I'm not sure. And so it would be interesting to sort of tease out why that might have worked for Kamala, why that worked in that moment. We saw in that same debate, Kirsten Gillibrand trying to sort of get more speaking time, trying to interject a little more in the way that men often do in debates, and seemed like it did not go over as well for her, that it was not well received when she did it. And so, why is that? And I don't necessarily know the answer to that, but we're certainly seeing more than one answer to what happens when women try to sort of insert themselves more in that way.
I was just going to say, I think it's interesting to consider that I was really interested in the debates. And for me, there were 3 real substantive clashes that happened during the debate. And one of them was between Castro and O'Rourke, but then the other 2 were between a female candidate and a male candidate. I'd say Kamala Harris and Joe Biden's clash, and then also Tim Ryan's clash with Tulsi Gabbard. Yeah. I think those were like the 3 big, main clashes. And of the ones that involved women, in both cases, it's widely seen that the women came out on top. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's really interesting. And I think that the debates overall are very interesting because at least in past elections, it's always been sort of assumed that women have a lot to lose from debates because there's so much emphasis on like their appearance and there's so much nitpicking of female candidates that they have a lot to lose in debates. But overall, I think almost all of the female, in fact, I would say yes, all of the female candidates got some sort of bump from the debate. Mm-hmm. And the candidates who maybe lost support or weren't seen to have done very well were all men. So I thought that was really interesting in light of like how we sort of expect the media to treat women, that most, I think media outlets acknowledge that the women did very well in the debate.
Mm-hmm. I couldn't agree with you more, but I would say on this point that Kelly's raising, and we're discussing about women confronting, that, in conversations I've had with people about Senator Gillibrand's candidacy, and mostly with women, although not all, her confronting Senator Franken, right? Mm-hmm. And demanding that he do what he do, and then, of course, or that he leave, and then, of course, others came up behind her. She's paying a huge price for that. I don't know whether that shows up in polls, but in every conversation I've had with anyone, that has come up, and a lot of women have just crossed her off their list. I obviously think that's wrong. She's a terrific candidate and a strong one, too. But I wonder, actually, as I reflect on it now that we're talking about it, whether it was this absolute direct, no, you have done this and this is wrong and you need to be treated the way others who've done that have been treated, was sort of a bridge too far. And I think that's what's behind some of the people's feeling. And I recall when Kelly and I were talking to her that, I don't remember if this was in the interview or not, she explained to us, the circumstances, and that there had been congressional staff who had been allegedly harassed by him. And so she said it wasn't a spur of the moment thing. It wasn't, gee, I'm angry today and I'm going to say this. It was a thoughtful, considered act. And yet she seems to have paid a big price for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it's interesting because I've had the same experience of, when I hear this reaction from voters, it's mainly from women who are criticizing Kirsten. And honestly, it's mainly from women of older generations, I think. And I think that sort of harkens back to a time when, in order to be considered a serious person in the world, you sort of had to be part of the guys club. And it was sort of, you had to show that you weren't one of those feminists, right? Like you weren't out to get, I don't hate men. I'm a feminist, but I don't hate men. There was a lot of emphasis on like maintaining this sense of solidarity with men. And so I think a lot of women are sort of reacting to that they're feeling defensive of men who are in power on the Democratic side, rather than wanting to listen to a woman.
Well, I think, I would be among that, so to speak, older generation of feminists. You're right that times have changed and women have more range of motion, so to speak, in their dealings with men, just by sheer result of our persistence in seeking positions of responsibility. But I also think that, Senator Gillibrand is much younger, right? So maybe she's in her early 50s, I believe. So, perhaps it was the case she felt that those were the most likely women voters. But, if something like that comes from such a powerful place as it apparently did for her, I kind of find it, I guess, curious that women, no matter what their age, react so negatively, because certainly unless you confront and compete, you can't win, right?
Right.
I mean, it's just not possible. So I don't know, more for us to think about as we go forward and take a look at all this in terms of that issue. And I'm guessing on another note that, Amy Klobuchar, who isn't doing as well in the polls as Harris and Warren, will probably try to figure out a way to be more assertive as she goes forward. She really needs to bump up and make her presence known.
Yeah, I think that she was probably in that way sort of hurt by being in the first debate. I get the very strong sense from at least the 4 women senators that they don't want to directly attack each other, that they see themselves in some way at least as being kind of in a sisterhood. And so, they want to attack the men, not attack each other. And their campaigns seem very much that way. You see video of when, the campaigns, maybe Gillibrand's campaign is marching right behind Harris's in a parade, and they start, chanting together instead of against each other. And, and I've certainly sensed that as well. And, perhaps not surprisingly because of that, although completely surprisingly, if you look at the actual ideas behind campaigns, people who say they want Warren, Harris is their second choice and vice versa, versus people who say they want Biden and Bernie as their second choice and vice versa, which makes literally no sense.
I don't understand why are you saying it doesn't make sense to you? I don't get it.
Well, I don't think that people who want to elect Biden, Bernie is like the total opposite in terms of policy and in terms of worldview. And so it only makes sense if you're thinking gender. It makes no sense if you're thinking about the more natural pairing should be that people who like Warren also like Sanders, but that's in fact not what we're seeing.
Well, I think people know, on the gender point that any one of these women, among other things, this goes back to something we were discussing a few minutes ago, is going to pay particular attention to issues that concern women and girls. So there may be some things that, someone doesn't like about Harris's positions or Warren's or their respective professional backgrounds, but they know that. And these women voters will, elect the next Democratic president. So it's also a gender issue, but a slightly different spin on it, and one I find heartening, that people will be able to get past, well, I just don't like that agenda of Elizabeth Warren's. But if she's their choice, they know she's going to fight for child care or equal pay or reproductive rights. And that goes for all 4 of them. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I think that's the gender point is a huge one. But I think it's the downside of it that I've been thinking about a bit is that, this really goes to the experience that Amy Klobuchar and Kirsten Gillibrand are having. Why is it when they are so superbly qualified, right, that they are polling no better, at least right now as we talk, than men with considerably less experience? And that, to me, is a gender issue too, but a bad one or a negative one.
Yeah, I think it's a gender issue and also this sort of issue of lanes, like the lanes that are being set up in which people are running are not necessarily the ones you would expect. And so, like I was saying with Warren and Sanders, you'd think they'd be fighting it out for sort of the left lane, but that's not, in fact, what's really happening. And I think that has been the issue that I've seen with both Senators Gillibrand and Klobuchar is people having trouble figuring out sort of what lane to put them in and thus figure out, whether that's the candidate for them. And that, I think, in some ways is related to gender because some of these lanes are clearly about identity. But I think there's also other factors there.
It's interesting that you say that because I have to say I wouldn't say that when I look at the picture, I see it that way. And certainly when I read articles, I see, Harris and Klobuchar grouped with Biden as, more middle of the road candidates, say. And they're together in, so to speak, that lane.
I think that's the lane that would make sense and that the political reporters want to put it in, but that's not the lanes that the voters are falling into.
Yeah, if you look at 538 recently had a piece where it talks about unpacking people's first choices versus their second choices. And it really bears out what Kelly said, which is that a lot of people whose first choice is Biden, their second choice is Sanders. A lot of people whose first choice is Warren, their second choice is Harris, and vice versa. And so they had like a little analysis about how lanes hadn't really emerged earlier in the primary, and now they are emerging, but they're different than we expected. So I think the narrative in sort of political discourse hasn't quite caught up to the way that people are thinking about the candidate.
Well, so this is an interesting point, which goes to a larger stumbling block, which is that the predominantly white male reporters, what you're suggesting is that they may be classifying the candidates differently than voters are, which is certainly a plausible scenario. I think it's really interesting, though, to think about that, for us to keep watching this going forward because, as the debate stage gets smaller, as people have to make hard choices, are they raising enough money to stay in the race past September? That deadline is going to be huge. I think maybe we'll see whether there are, so to speak, a new set of lanes, and there are fewer people in each, right? I think it would be fascinating. But if it remains a gender issue, boy, are we going to have, or girl, I should say, are we going to have a lot to think about?
Yeah. In ways that I think may, in fact, be, in some cases, helping the women. At least they are sort of a little more recognizable. I watched debates with groups of people, and a lot of people are like, which white guy is that? I just can't even keep track of the white guys. And, I was at Netroots this weekend. We did a pub quiz, and, somebody was trying to name which presidential candidates were which, and somebody was like, I don't know, one of the white guys, so it not for nothing that the first person to drop out of the race was, in fact, a white guy who had trouble figuring out, what he presented that no one else did, what lane he was in. And so, I think in some ways it can help the women. That's not going to win them the presidency, but it may allow some of the women to at least stay in a little bit longer than they may otherwise be able to.
Well, they absolutely. I mean, how can anyone get away from the fact that we're in this, situation we've never been in before? And you can't help see these women and consider how good they are, whether you want one of them or not. At the same time, and this goes back to something I was saying a moment ago, that we're seeing a whole bunch of white guys who haven't been senators, haven't been attorneys general, haven't been Harvard professors, whatever it is, the mix of qualifications, amazing qualifications that these women have. I mean, you had to be really sort of not very smart to not understand that's a form of sexism in its own self, right? I mean, that these guys just think, well, it's kind of like, what it reminds me of? Did you see that article the other day that said, this is a paraphrase, that 1 out of every 8 men thinks he could hit a ball back at Serena? It was, I'm laughing as we talk about it. It was, and how preposterous that is, right?
Yeah.
But it
I
just
told my
showed.
husband about that, and he laughed for about 10 minutes and then said, but Serena Williams is the best athlete on earth. And I said, I know.
That's exactly right. I mean, this kind of clouded vision is a nice way to put it, right? Mm-hmm. But I'm sure hoping that they keep being noticed, and we'll see. One other point I think just to think about as we move into August, I can hardly believe it's August, but, the centennial of suffrage is coming up, obviously. And I'm kind of looking forward to seeing how the candidates address that matter, too. Whether they address it substantively and look across the full range of what it means. And looking forward to our having a discussion about that as well. Mm-hmm. So I would say just to our wonderful listeners, and this is just from me, Rebecca, to everyone who's listening out there, it's been such a treat to be having this conversation with you, starting with Kelly and Sophie, and I think we're all on to something here. We're just really exploring and sharing and trying to figure it out, and there may be dog days of August, but they won't be at Voter In, right?
Absolutely.
Or Two Broads generally.
Yeah, and I think, since we started this, we have seen, it's pretty clear that it's sort of a top tier of Democratic candidates, at least for right now, has emerged. And of the 4, 2 are women, and that's fantastic and amazing and heartening. And so, I think there's still clearly a lot of things going on with gender and sexism, but at least the country, at least the Democrats are elevating 2 women to be among the top 4 candidates.
Yeah. Who'd have thunk it, right?
Yeah.
It's, yeah. Well, I say onward and upward. It's always great to talk, and we'll just keep on talking. And if people who are listening have comments or ideas, I hope you'll share them with us even more than you already have.
Yes, please do.
The Vote Her In segment is a collaboration of Two Broads Talking Politics and author Rebecca Sive. Our theme song is called Are You Listening off of the album Elephant-Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast. You can contact us at twobroadstalkingpolitics@gmail.com or on Twitter or Facebook at Two Broads Talk. You can find all of our episodes at twobroadstalkingpolitics.com or anywhere podcasts are found.